What's up, guys, and welcome in. My name is Andrew, and I talk about manifestation, energy, plant technology, dragons, that sort of thing. And I wanted to talk about the law of assumption today, but make it a bit more grounded and practical, right? Like, what does it look like to actually embody the state of peace and assuming that everything's going to go well? Because that's what it is, right? The law of assumption is essentially assuming a state, assuming the state preferred, right? But what does that look like? What does that feel like? How does that supposed to change anything? And like, it's nice to say, oh, well, if I just feel good right now, like everything is going to shift. But that's how it works, is, reality is a reflection of you. This external environment is a reflection of you. So for us to really dive into this, we have to kind of lay out like, okay, how does this work and how can we approach this in a way that is practical? So let's think of this as like the multiverse, right? You're here as one version and you're trying to get over here to the version of you that has all of the money, has the love, has the success, has the freedom and the security and all the stuff that you might be going for right now. And basically, enacting the law of assumption would mean that you would feel all of those things, right? The security and the freedom and all of this stuff. You would feel all of that now, and then reality would shift. But how do you do that when you're faced with bills and you're faced with, trauma and all this other stuff that's going on? So I wanted to dive into my personal method of how I approached it that actually gave me results. Feel free to use it. This is free. But essentially, what I had to do was I had to create structures, and I had to constantly remind myself, what would this version of me be doing? So what does this look like? It looks like me, let's just go with financial security. So getting to a point where you feel secure. You don't feel like there's another, confirmation burp. You don't feel like there's another bill. You're not worried about bills. You're not worried about bills. You're not worried about financial stressors. You're not worried about, what if something goes wrong? What if something else breaks in the house? You're not worried about any of like the financial stuff. This version of me, right, that's wealthy, successful, has the ability and freedom to do what I want when I want. Would they have investments? Yes, they would have investments. So what can you do right now? Well, I may not have $100,000 to invest or $1 million to invest or whatever, but I've put a couple dollars over here, right? That symbolic act of I can set aside this for investments, right? The thinking is different. Version of me, that old version of me would have been like, I need my money, so I'm not going to put any of my money in investments. Even though if I thought about successful version of me, investments come to mind. I would have investments, right? I would have property. I would feel secure. I wouldn't be thinking about bills if I was successful, right? So it's like, it's constantly reminding yourself, I have to bring up this version of me in my head and be like, okay, what would you do? I would feel calm right now. I wouldn't be stressed about this thing. I wouldn't be stressed about that thing. I would probably be planning a trip. You know what I mean? Now, you may be telling yourself, well, I don't have the resources to do what other version of me is doing, right? You don't need the resources to do what other version of you is doing. The resources is an illusion. All you need to do is do small symbolic acts that are representative of what that version of you is doing or thinking or whatever, right? So something like just walking with confidence and peace, right? generating peace, consciously generating peace, right? Where you may have to do meditation or breath work to generate that, but consciously generating peace is very important with this, because would that version of you feel peaceful? Yes. So we have to address that. Would that version of you be traveling? Yes. You may not be going to the Maldives right now, but why don't you take a trip somewhere that you can do, right? Something that you can do, because that's reflective of that frequency. Food, right? What would that version of you be eating? Eat it now, right? Even if it's on a smaller scale, right? You're consciously not navigating the way that you've been navigating, essentially, right? This requires moments of presence, where you take a moment and you think about what that version of you is doing, right? And the more that you do this, the more that you start to build connections with this other version of you that's already living the life that you're attempting to acquire. You start to bridge the realities together, right? There's bleed over from that reality, and you'll notice that your thought processes will be different, and it'll almost feel automatic. Now, the traditional method for the law of assumption is that you take the state assumed, and by being on that frequency, your thought processes change. Things start to change. Things start to get a little weird. You're like, I'm operating differently, right? And you don't need to know exactly how your operating is going to get to your other reality. You just need to know that you're on the frequency of it, right? So it doesn't have a choice but to change. Being on the frequency of a thing, reality reflects the frequency. It's not the other way around. So by adopting a frequency, right? And when we think of frequency of success, we think security, we think freedom, we think, security and freedom, right? I mean, do you really need anything else? So it's important to remind ourselves to go back to that state. It's really being present, right? Really like taking a moment and being like, okay, I'm presented with a problem. I don't prefer this problem. And then go get guidance from your other self. What would you do, right? How would you feel about this problem? I wouldn't really worry about it. You know what I mean? Take a moment to really think about what that version of you is doing. That's very intentional with this whole process. There's a passiveness about the law of assumption, and then there's the intentional aspect where it's like you have to really sit yourself down, right? And adopt the frequency. The problems that you see are just a reflection, they're just an echo of what your frequency has been up until this point. So for that to change, we first have to change the frequency. I hope that this was helpful and a little bit more practical. But it's been working for me, right? So like now I'm at a point where I'm like, okay, well, that version of me would have some online businesses, right? So now I assume that my online businesses are going to go well, right? I set it up and I set it aside, right? I don't think about it too much. Sometimes my mind will go back to online business stuff and I'll tweak something and change something, or I'll learn something. Excuse me, confirmation burp. I'll see a video on YouTube that enlightens me to something. This is all frequency, right? It's giving you the hints. You'll see hints in reality, like here's the next move. You need to think about this, then that. And then next thing you know, something big happens. You're like, oh, okay, like this is actually working. You know, so again, I hope this was helpful, and I will see you guys later.